Okay. All right. We are live. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to our Medicine Buddha practice. Particularly welcome to those who are new, joining us for the first time. So, if you're here for the first time, I would love to for you just to say hello in the chat if you want. This is all very optional, of course, but if you want to say hello, that would be great. And welcome to everyone else joining us back again. It's so wonderful to see everyone. Uh, uh, and welcome to anyone who, all those who were with me this weekend, this past weekend, for the South Sea Sangha retreat on grief and joy. It was really a special experience to share that time with everyone. So I see some folks joining us. Janice and Susan, yep, yes. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Janice, for that wonderful blessing. Um, yeah. So as usual, particularly if you're new, um, one of our traditions is to offer a prayer request um, in the chat. So any prayer requests that you have for yourself or someone close to you, for anything, um, and you can just type that into the chat box, and I will offer those. If you don't want to put anything publicly, um, just have a prayer request or an aspiration. Kind of, holding it in your mind is also good as well. Um, so this space originally um, came about as a response to the pandemic. So we've been going, for just barely over a year now. I think we started last April. At the very beginning, of quarantine, towards the beginning, and we continue. Um, yeah, so you can start putting those requests into the chat box whenever. Tonight, um, I do want to offer just a little bit of practice around like helping people transition into the bardo or the spirit realm. So the bardo um, in Tibetan Buddhism is, well, when we say the bardo, we're referring to the after death experience and migration. But the bardos in general are just a way for us to talk about transition and the spaces in between transition. So, for instance, a bardos are, you know, the space between living and dying. That's a bardo. Or between sleeping and being awake is a bardo. Um, it's the transition from one thing to another. Um, but often when we say the bardo, we're just referring to this after death experience, which is full of mythology and lots of stuff. And I know some of you joined me last year for a retreat through Tara Mandala on death and dying, where we explored pretty, in some detail. I don't want to say thoroughly, but in detail, we did explore, the passage into the after death experience. Um, I tend to refer to the bardo these days as, the after death experience as entering into the spirit world or the spirit realm. Of course, this is an experience where consciousness, or depending on the tradition, spirit leaves the physical body, let's go with the physical body, and then enters into, of course, the formless realm, right? So when we're not embodied physically, then we're in a formless realm. And we can call a realm a dimension, a plane. I'm not, terribly up to date with the differentiation between these particular terms like plane and realm and dimension, but you're in a different, well, different place. So different, and places is really actually misleading too, but you're in a different manifestation, right? Different manifestation. You're in the formless manifestation. But there are all kinds of things, reasons why our transition at the time of our death can be disrupted. Our journey into the spirit world, the bardo, can be disrupted, and that disruption can lead to all kinds of situations. So practices like praying for the dead and doing certain kinds of visualizations, which are very common in Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism, are really important. But these practices have been found and are practiced in indigenous cultures all over the world, right? And we do this sometimes too. This isn't a new practice too that we're adding on. Like we've done this in our space together, focusing on those who are transitioning into the spirit realm. Um, and there are particular practices that we can do that align themselves more closely with the passage of folks into the to the bardo spirit realm. But as I've said over and over again, it doesn't matter what the practice is. It doesn't matter what the deity you're practicing is either. It's just a matter of trust and faith in the deity. If you were, Medicine Buddha isn't just for healing, right? Medicine Buddha is for anything that we need. If Medicine Buddha is a deity that we're closest to, there's really no, in terms of wisdom deities, there's really no difference between the deities. Um, I just say, whatever you're closest to, that's what you're using, right? I don't necessarily have to like turn away from my medicine Buddha practice to offer practices for the dead, or even to offer to do compassion practices because I can do that with medicine Buddha, right? But when we're connecting, like so, when we're connecting to a wisdom in deity, we're connecting to our own innate nature, right? So we're actually beginning to channel these innate qualities that are inherent. Innate means inherent. It's a part of it's who we are, right? Wisdom deities arise as a skillful way for us to connect to a part of who and what we are that may be unaccessible in any other situation. Um, and I think that for some of you, true, you may have particular dispositions or sensitivities to um, to disembodied, you know, beings, right? To formless beings in various ways, right? And this is a practice that I think if you have that kind of sensitivity, This is something you should do quite often, actually, which is to kind of particularly practice, do things that begin to open space and passages for dead people around us as well. And you don't have to be sensitive either, but there, through these practices, these are ways that we can really help, right? And we don't really, some of us, well, it's hard for some of us to connect to the impact of practice for others, right? So we do all these prayers, and what's the, how do you calculate, right, or qualify, describe, or measure the impact of prayer and practice on others? Who knows, right? I mean, I guess the best way to determine that would be to just say, okay, I prayed for this thing, for this outcome, and it happened. Maybe the prayer worked. You know, um, this past weekend we talked about aspiration and prayer. If you joined us, and how aspiration and prayer, we've talked about this also in this space, they become ways in which we open, right? So yes, last week, I know I'm making all these references, you know, um, which is great because I'm remembering what I teach, right? Because I just show up and open my mouth, so I don't really have any notes or anything. But last week we started talking about prayer, vulnerability, openness, right? How they lead from one thing, to another. A prayer is an opening, is an act of vulnerability, right? And that vulnerability helps me to open and surrender to this a greater expression of energy, to the deity. That surrendering, that open, begins to shift energy. It begins to shift energy. Energy shifts causes and conditions, right? And things begin to happen. You know, Sometimes on a really subtle, nuanced level, sometimes on a greater level. This is why it's so wonderful, amazing, and powerful to practice together in groups, because we can actually combine our powers like Voltron, or whatever, you know, we come together and create a massive wave of energy. You know. So I like to think that all the work we've been doing this past year together has been of benefit. Voltron, Transformers, Sailor Moon, Captain Planet, whatever, whatever, whatever does it for you. Or a Care Bear stare. Oh, I remember those teachings on the Care Bear stare. Ooh, don't get me started on those again. Okay. So if you haven't already, go ahead and go ahead and place your prayer if you want. And get started in like the next minutes with practice. Um, so as we prepare, I just want to they'll answer this question from Shelley here. So when in the traditional transitional bardo after death, when the breath is no longer there to be an anchor, or there are other anchors to focus, ground us in the bardo, remembering the guru, benefactor, feeling the energy body, mantra, prayer. Yeah, in theory. On paper, we do have anchors. In actuality, in experience, it's really difficult. You have to understand the shock of transitioning from the physical body. Well, is it a shock? It can be a shock. It can be a shock. It can be many different things for many different people, but there is there is a disorientation that is connected to transitioning from this physical body, this physicality, this grounded us in this reality that's something we felt and has like actually been really weighted down by. And when we begin, when our consciousness or spirit or soul, whatever, begins to leave, then there is this bewilderment that arises in that transition, um, and that's something that we're practicing to hold, you know. And I think that in that bewilderment, you know, the thing for us to hold on to is doing what we can to give to to remember a deity, to remember benefactors, to remember mantra, prayer, any actually really quite honestly anything virtuous is important. Anything not so virtuous is going to take you down a different path. You get hooked onto something like hate or anger or overwhelming sadness, it's going to take you down a path of becoming, well, quite honestly, the subject of a Stephen King movie and book. I mean, this is, um, I mean, you know, let's just say I watch a horror movie about whatever, vengeful spirits and demons and all this stuff. I don't necessarily believe that they're completely fantasy, given my experiences thus far in life. Um, Sometimes I look at a Stephen King movie. I used to read Stephen King when I was young. I was really into horror and fantasy and everything when I was a teenager. But yeah, when I see a Stephen King movie, it's like watching a documentary. It's like it's like watching a documentary. So what was I saying? I'm going to finish this question. And then we'll finish the rest of the questions after the practice tonight. Um, so yeah, so what we're training for right now in our practice is to really be able to turn our minds to a virtuous anchor, right? So to the teacher, to a mantra, right? To something that feels neutral, if possible. Of course, in that transition, we're also moving into the dawning. Like we're experiencing the dawning of the mind itself. And that dawning of the mind and that transition is again extremely subtle. You know, um, I mean, here's an analogy here. It's like, and this comes out. You know, this comes right out of Tibetan Buddhist teachings, right? So, some of these analogies are um, like trying to maintain excuse me, trying to maintain focus um, in the middle of the most intense, loud, traumatizing, noisy chaos ever. Like that's really how it's described in the teachings. Like that's what it's like when you leave the body, you're losing an anchor and you're moving into pure consciousness. And if we haven't done the training that we should have done with our consciousness, then the consciousness is just like really intense energy, right? And without the body, it becomes harder to maintain awareness, right? And so yeah, so you lose this, a lot of our ability of awareness. And so what we're having to rely on, I think, is devotion and trust that we've cultivated in relationship to certain deities. I've said this before. Maybe some of you have remembered this. I say it really recently. I mean, I say it really often. Is that you have to you have to let your practice do work for you. I actually said this quite a bit this past weekend. You have to let your practice do work for you. For me, that is a way to train in allowing my practice to show up when I need it in times where I can't practice. And definitely transitioning into the bardo, you know, is a moment where many of us will find it very difficult to consciously practice because of the overwhelm of transition, moving from the physical into a strictly energetic experience. You know, so in that movement, we're allowing the practice to hold us. So in that moment, our practice offerings, karmic connections to the deities, like for instance, Medicine Buddha, those connections will come back to hold us as we transition through this really intense period. Now, if we have some agency in that transition, and that comes with lots of practice, right? Not just in one life, but multiple lives, right? That comes to fruition with us being able to maintain awareness during the transition. Most beings will lose consciousness. They will lose. There will be there will be like a blackout or something, right? A loss of consciousness moving through this experience. But there are beings who, with tremendous practice, can maintain awareness through the whole. I mean, that's rare, but possible. Very much possible. Of course, if you're an enlightened being already who's emanated into this realm and you die, you just kind of go back right into enlightenment. It's like you can't undo enlightenment. Like as soon you have tremendous agency, for your whole life, right? And there's a way in which you have the agency to manage everything in terms of the transitioning, because you've already realized the illusion. The closer you get to death, the more this illusion will begin to break apart, and so that breaking away of the realness of everything means that we begin to develop deeper agency in the practice of moving on. So this is like the practice. Practice is like stockpiling resources and supplies. Like you're just putting that to the side. Like a savings account or whatever, right? You're saving up stuff, right? And then at the moment of death, at the transition, then all the stuff that you've put aside, you're going to start going through it. It's going to help you move through. When you can't, when you can no longer, gather resources that you need, you already have those resources put away over the course of your life. But it's not about this life either. It's about all the lives, right? It doesn't, you don't have to like, this isn't about being a Buddhist. Um, it's just, these are just symbols and uh, analogies and things that help us shape relationship to this idea of passing, but it's not like the truth. It's not the truth. We can only know the truth through our own experience of the truth, right? So, you know, for those of you who've read these teachings around the Bardo, like that's not the Bardo for everyone, right? That's just the way this particular path has described the bardo. Because if you look at Judaism, it's a different explanation. If you look at Catholicism, it's a different explanation. If you look at, different Vedic traditions, like it's going to be a different explanation, right? Of what it means to die and transition and what happens afterwards and so forth. Um, I think the root thing that we should be focusing on is again, always the accumulation of wisdom and compassion, um, the accumulation of virtue through, positive good karma, um, the work of just doing as much as we can to metabolize trauma in this life, um, to show up as much as possible so everything that arises for us. That's all we can. That's you can just focus on that and you'll be fine. You know, right? If you can just do those basic things and practice, you don't. I just don't. You don't have to like. You don't have to have a plan for death. I mean, you have to do the legal stuff. That's important to do the legal stuff. Because at the moment of death, you'll have this. You'll have some peace of mind, right? It's gonna, if you have like all your worldly stuff in order, then you don't have to, it's less likely you'll be attached to it, right? Because that attachment keeps consciousness and spirit bound to the earth realm, to this realm. I mean, that and many other things, right? You know, um, Attachment binds us to this world, and we want to let go of those attachments. Now, some people make a choice to stay here, but again, that takes a lot of agency to do. That choice to stay connected to this realm, in terms of being a ghost or something, a spirit, that has to come from a place of love for that to be restorative and generative. You know, like you're choosing, right? You're choosing to remain because of love, but you have to be careful because that love, for most of us, is just another way for us to practice attachment, right? So, and what most of us are confused around is the difference between love and attachment. Love isn't attachment. Love is about freedom, right? But if we make a choice out of authentic love for people to be free, then we're choosing to become agents of people's safety and liberation by choosing to stay. You know, uh, the Tibetan Book of the Dead is largely inaccessible for most of us, right? I don't even. There's one prayer from Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is not what the name of the book is. Actually, that's a colonized title for the book. Is actually the Bardo Total, which is liberation, which translates into liberation upon hearing. So, of course, when Westerners get a hold of these texts, then we just change it up to make it sound much more glamorous and sexy and mystical. It's not the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's a manual, it's a ritual manual for advanced practitioners and people within a monastic situation to put together rituals for people to move through the Bardo experience, which most of us do not have the skills to practice. It's Enigma text, um, and I am unfortunately I'm not Enigma. um, Liberation upon hearing. So liberation upon hearing means that we can get liberated through our senses, you know. And the really amazing thing about the Bardo Total is that it really corresponds to the dying process because our hearing is often the last sense to go. So when you're sitting with folks who are passing, continuing to talk, up until the very end, and offering reassurance and like asking people that is, to well, telling folks that it's okay to transition, to move on, is really helpful, you know. And even beyond, even after that, you know, I think you should, that there's always a possibility that folks are listening. Um, this is all very new to everyone. These texts, um, and these commentaries, and so forth. But anywho, so we will, um, let's do practice. I'll tell you what. I will, if Michael is able to do this. Um, we'll do our 30 minutes of practice, and then we'll come back and continue with some of these questions, um, as well. So I think this is always important. Um, what people actually don't know, and now after this, I'm going to be quiet and do practice. Um, but what most folks don't know, what none of you know, is that everyone thinks that like I hit the scene with radical dharma, and that was like the teachings, the social liberation teachings. Actually, my first serious kind of area of teaching was, death and dying. It was just death. It was death and dying, because, after I finished 3-year retreat, my stepmother was dying, and I just kind of threw myself into these teachings for years, and studying the Bardo, studying just other cultures' understanding of death and dying, and organizing events, um, you know, teaching about grieving and mourning, and these teachings are just like very. I have been really immersed, in these teachings and this practice, for a while. Anyhow, I can continue on and on about death and dying. Um, let's continue. Let's get into our practice, and so let's begin. As always, allowing our bodies to come into a position that feels appropriate for practice. Right. So, what feels appropriate for you? You know, are you sitting down, standing up, lying down? Right? Are you sitting on your, really comfortable chair or couch like me? Let let the body be. Let your body be, right? The body is already going through a lot of stress, right? And for some of us, a lot of trauma. And we work with trauma and the stress by just letting go of the rigidity and giving the body space. This is what we call agency for someone who asks. Agency means that I make choices, right? I have the power to make choices. And agency, self agency, is the power to make choices for myself about what is conducive to my liberation and my happiness and safety and so forth. That's self agency, is power. Agency is power. And power is about gathering resources that we need. So allowing your body just to be. And I just invite you to reflect on any intentions that you have for your practice right now. Why are you practicing? Whom are you practicing for? And we're going to actually beginning, we're going to begin to dedicate the merit right now. So we're dedicating the merit by saying that whatever benefit arises for me in this practice, I instantly dedicate it to any being who needs this benefit. And that ultimately this benefit, I hope, will help all of us get free as quickly as possible from the cycle of birth and death without consent. So we're bound in this cycle until we develop clarity, wisdom, love to break out of the cycle. And then we become bodhisattvas and we can choose. Then we choose to come back to help. And that's the awakening of agency in this path, when we can choose to come back to this for no other reason but to help. So that can be an aspiration for us as well, that we develop the capacity to one day choose to be here as agents of liberation. And if your breath is accessible for you, I invite you just to shift your attention to your breath. If your breath isn't accessible, I invite you just to shift your attention for now to something that feels neutral, grounding. Neutral or grounding. But if you are with the breath, just noticing the in-breath and the out-breath. So as thoughts, emotions, narratives begin to be uncovered, exposed as we're breathing, I just encourage you to allow these thoughts, these emotions to simply rise up into the space of the mind. So just letting it go. Imagining that your thoughts and emotions and narratives are just smoke from an incense. Smoke from incense rising up into the space. You see it, but you return back to the anchor of the breath. Just letting that material just rise up, but just gently coming back over and over again to the breath. Allowing the breath to deepen, to elongate the in-breath and the out-breath, in and out. Going a little further with the breath, imagining that as we inhale, we're inhaling into something in our experience that seems heavy or uncomfortable. This inhale begins to dissolve that experience, and in the out breath, just breathe it out. So we're letting go of some of the things that seem heavy or overwhelming for us. Just a few more breaths here. So I want to, at this point, move into our mantra before we move into our prayer requests. So Minla Sangye Kino Soha, which means medicine Buddha. So Minla Sangye means medicine Buddha, Kino means to think of. But in our practice, we want to imagine that Kino, this word, this Tibetan word, becomes what we need, right? Becomes the verb we need to experience from medicine Buddha. So maybe it's actually we want medicine Buddha to think of us, but maybe we want medicine Buddha to remember us or to hold us. Maybe we want medicine Buddha, just to sit beside us, to walk with us. Maybe in the mantra, we're actually praying that we want to remember that we are an, an expression of medicine Buddha as well. So taking a moment to reflect on what you need from medicine Buddha, from Minla Sangye. So we'll begin our chanting. You can chant along or sit and listen. We'll just chant it a few times. And as we chant, just opening, just whatever your experience right now, the capacity to open, right? We're calling in the consciousness, the energy, the blessings of medicine Buddha into our space. And we just want to actually believe that medicine Buddha is being called into the space to support us in our practice. Right? We begin. Om La Sangye Kino Soha. 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 And so, turning our attention to prayer requests that have been offered, we began to offer these requests, these prayers, into this awakened space energy permeated by the consciousness of medicine Buddha, but also deeply populated by all the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, the Dharma protectors, all benevolent, loving, caring ancestors, saints, other deities, gods and goddesses, and other beings who are committed to the liberation, to the safety, to the love of us and others. We dedicate these prayers to you, praying that the blessing of the consciousness of Medicine Buddha will begin to shift energy and circumstances to bring about what we most deeply want for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our communities, and for the world. There can be no true change without this primary practice of asking for what we need. And we begin to offer prayers for my dad, Saturnino Rodriguez, who died in February, for my mom, Judith, all those stuck at the border, those without their parents there. We offer this prayer. We offer prayers for the swift rebirth of my teacher, Barter Toku Rinpoche, who passed last month. I pray for the healing for me and my lineage and my guides as well. I pray to be open to receiving the gifts of Medicine Buddha and healing into my body. Offering prayers for my husband Aaron's efforts to heal and create sustainable self-care, especially in relation to his body and his work. Continue to offer prayers for those suffering with COVID. Offering prayers for John's health recovery. Offering prayers for all experiencing pain in body, heart, and mind. May they find comfort and healing. Offering prayers for my project to leave an abusive marriage of 40 years. Prayers for my 99-year-old grandfather who is recovering from a fall, for my own relationship to chronic pain, and for all working with unease. Offering prayers for the indigenous youth of Standing Rock who are still trying to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline and protect the water, the people, and their culture. Many are suffering from depression and suicidal thoughts. May there be liberation. Prayers for me and my family, my ancestors, and other formless beings who suffered or suffer. And offering prayers to help people make the correct steps towards eradicating systematic racism in America once and for all. Offering prayers that I connect with the healer or healers that I need at this phase of my life. Offering prayers for my mother Carol that her suffering may ease. Offering prayers for those experiencing anxiety as spaces open up and lower pandemic restrictions. Offering prayers for Alex and Laura that they move into addiction recovery soon. And offering prayers for Greg getting knee replacement surgery today, for Susie who feels very worried for her son, Sonny, for Sandy who is looking to foster a newborn baby soon. We're offering prayers for my great Nana as she navigates the bardo, and for her family as they navigate the funeral and life after her embodiment. Prayers for liberation from judgment. We're offering prayers for my sister who just moved with my little sister, with Down syndrome and was let go from her job this week, that she may experience all she needs in peace in these transitions. We're offering prayers for decolonization and disability justice, and prayers for the knee surgery I'm having this week. Offering prayers for my father who just passed away. I'm offering prayers also for the passing of Reverend Jones and for the well-being of his family as they move deeper into their grieving. I offer prayers for Mike, for his stability and well-being, for my grandmother, for her recovery from her illness. And I offer the prayers that have not been offered verbally, but those prayers that remain in our hearts, those prayers that we deeply wish movement and energy around and resolution. We dedicate all practice to the liberation of all beings. We all achieve freedom as quickly as possible. And so, when you're ready, shifting your attention down into your heart center, imagining that we're breathing in and out of the heart center. And we begin to imagine that from the space around us, as we're breathing in from the space around us, we also begin to breathe in this energy, this consciousness of Medicine Buddha that's been awakened around us. As we inhale into the heart center, we're inhaling this liberatory, healing energy of Medicine Buddha, the great healer, into the heart center. And as we continue to deeply inhale this energy into the heart center, as we exhale, we begin to imagine that we're actually exhaling into the body. So the breath isn't leaving the body, but we're imagining that the breath is just actually spreading throughout the internal inside of the body. Again, this is called an internal exhale. So breathing in the energy of Medicine Buddha, and as we exhale in the body, this energy of Medicine Buddha just begins to spread throughout the body through this internal exhale. So inhaling deeply into the heart center, exhaling into the body, circulating the consciousness, the healing of Medicine Buddha throughout the body. And so again, we can begin to imagine that this breath, this internal exhale, begins to dissolve these experiences of deep discomfort in the body. And as we move into our main mantra practice, we continue to move through this practice, and as things arise for us, as we begin maybe to notice and to connect to these deeper emotions around grief or anxiety or fear or sadness, again, we can imagine that we just allow these emotions, these experiences to have its space, to rise up into the spaciousness of the mind, and returning back to maybe experiencing this energy of Medicine Buddha, returning back to the breath if you're working with the breath. But letting this energy, consciousness of Medicine Buddha take care of you right now. Right, so Teya Ta Bekenze Maha Bekenze Ratsa Sumun Gate Soha. O Teya Ta Bekenze Maha Bekenze Ratsa Sumun Gate Soha. Teya begenze ma begenze raza sumunga te soa. 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 Teya For the last few minutes of our mantra practice, beginning to shift our attention from the breath and imagining that we are filled with this energy of Medicine Buddha, this consciousness, this liberatory healing energy. As we sit for this last section of practice, I want you to say to yourself over and over again that I am the healer. I am the healer. That I have the confidence of the healer, of the great healer. That I am an expression of healing. And allow yourself to really sit and to be in relationship with this experience of confidence that I am. I am Medicine Buddha. I am the healer. I have the innate capacity to be an agent of healing for myself and for all those around me. This is what we call taking on the pride of the deity, that I am the deity, I am Medicine Buddha. Begin again. 오태야 자웅백연세 백연세 마백연세 라스수문가제소아 제야 자웅백연세 백연세 마백연세 라스수문가제소아 제야자 백연세 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 백연세 마백연세 라스수문가제소아. We're going to actually take one more step, one more part of the mantra. And so this is going to be our practice for those who are transitioning into the bardo. So coming back to our heart centers. So breathing deeply into the heart center. Again, imagining that we're still deeply breathing in the consciousness, the energy of Medicine Buddha. And as we breathe into the heart center, our heart center begins to radiate with this warm light, this warm white light. And it begins to slowly fill our bodies up. we begin to imagine that we're glowing, radiating this brilliant, soft, white light into the space around us. We begin to imagine that this light begins to become so bright, so fierce, so strong, that begins even to light the darkness of the Bardo experience. That for all those beings connected to us who are struggling to transition on, who are just beginning to transition, for all those beings with those kinds of connections to us, we begin to light their way into the Bardo and into the spirit world, that our light, our radiance begins to remove all obstacles, all confusion, all fear, all terror. And this radiance opens up the path that leads them without obstacle into the Bardo, where they can continue on their path towards awakening or rebirth. And even for our spaces, our individual spaces that we're practicing in, we begin to imagine that any spirit in our space, in our personal space, who is ready to transition, that this light becomes a light that they can step into to transition on to the next realm. And offering this invitation for all those who want to accept it in your space. O te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata beyenze, beyenze, ma beyenze, razu sumunyare zoa. Te ata 마베겐세 라스 숨은 가는 소와 제야하자 온베겐세 베겐세 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 마베겐세 라스 숨은 가는 소와. We slowly begin to return our attention back into this moment, turning our attention even more precisely to the weight of our bodies making contact with the seat. Allowing this energy of Medicine Buddha to reside in the body as we transition out of our practice. Making prayers for the continued passage of all formless beings into the bardo. And if it seems necessary and appropriate, setting boundaries around you, asking any beings, formless beings, to give you space, not to bother you. Being very firm with those boundaries. And if you're feeling resourced enough, just taking a few deep breaths, inhaling through the nose, releasing out of the mouth, and letting go of anything that you feel as if you're holding on to, or maybe letting go of this feeling that something is holding on to you. But inhaling deeply, releasing all of those bounds, those attachments out through the out breath. we turn our attention to our closing prayer, Shanti Deva's mantra, our prayer that will be in your chat box. If you haven't already memorized it yet, we just recite this 3 times together. And we begin. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach unto the ends of space. May I be a protector to those without protection, a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine, and may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach unto the ends of space. Finally, may I be a protector to those without protection, and a leader for those who journey, and a boat, a bridge, a passage for those desiring the further shore. May the pain of every living creature be completely cleared away. May I be the doctor and the medicine. And may I be the nurse for all sick beings in the world until everyone is healed. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. Okay, everyone. Thank you for your practice. And I'm just going to have one more question here. We're going to be finished in just a couple of minutes. How are some people more susceptible to being in contact with disembodied spirits? Are there different kinds of disembodied spirits? Um, everyone has different capacities, different sensitivities. Um, and these sensitivities are really about being sensitive to energy and to energetic vibrations. Um, and beings, disembodied beings are just energy. They're energy vibrating at certain frequencies. And so some of us, you know, are in tune to that a little bit. I think more people than we understand actually have this sensitivity, but for many of us, it's been deeply repressed. I think there are a lot of children, a lot of kids who have some of these natural abilities, but they get repressed. Um, and I think that's the case because as we're moving through adolescent development, we're actually being trained to see reality as being linear and static or material, you know. not to see reality as non-linear, to see not to see reality as fluid and moving and changing. So we get conditioned to see reality in just one way, and that blocks the ability to see and to sense the the multiplicity of phenomenal reality. That there's actual multiple things happening at once. And so, are there different kinds of disembodied beings? Many, 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 many kinds of disembodied beings. Different classes, different. I mean, I mean, they're just very general classifications, but those general classifications are really, they're not expansive enough, right? Yeah. But yeah, spirits themselves, and if we're just talking specifically about spirits, there are different kinds. I mean, there are ancestors, and there are just like other kinds of spirits, or there are beings that are spirits that are very benevolent, kind, supportive. There are spirits that are not kind or benevolent. So, yeah. So I hope that was helpful. Um, so thank you everyone for your practice. Thank you to Michael for holding the space open a little longer tonight. Um, and yeah, so please come back and watch the recordings of the practices, and continue to practice. And right, and we'll see you again in some form or fashion on the interwebs. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Please take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you and see you again soon. Okay.